It's funny, isn't it, Marna, how 7 years of your life poured into something brick by brick, relationship by relationship, can be dismantled in about 10 minutes flat. 10 minutes in a sterile conference room under flickering fluorescent lights. That's what I think about sometimes, staring out the window now. Not the anger, not anymore. Just the quiet absurdity of it all. Your leadership style is too rigid for our culture, Colin. That's what she said. Eleanor Vance, our brand new president, barely 2 months in the chair, didn't pull me aside, didn't schedule a one-on-one. Nope, right there. Monday morning management meeting. Every single department, head staring, trying desperately not to stare. My name for the record is Colin Hayes, 47 years old, Ian. Or I was 47 then. And until that precise moment, I was the operations director at Meridian Dynamics. Had been for 7 solid years. I remember just nodding. Once, a single slow dip of my head. I closed my laptop, the click echoing a little too loudly in the sudden silence. Understood, I said. My voice sounded calm, even to me. Distant, like it belonged to someone else. Eleanor Vance. She was brought in by the investment group that bought out Arthur Sterling, the founder. They wanted vision. They wanted presence, someone to polish Meridian up for the next flip, the big acquisition payday. She wore these sharp, tailored suits that probably cost more than my first car, spouted jargon like synergistic alignment and leveraging core competencies. Sounded impressive if you didn't listen too closely. Thing is, in her 8 weeks, she'd never once set foot on our actual manufacturing floor. Never seen the sparks fly, never smelled the machine oil, never shaken the hand of the guy running the CNC machine that milled our most critical component. I went back to my office. Didn't argue, didn't raise my voice. What was the point? 22 minutes. That's how long it took me to pack up 7 years. One standard issue cardboard box for the coffee mug my kids gave me, the picture of my wife, Sarah, and a couple of worn paperbacks. Another much heavier box for the binders. Oh, those binders. My whole system was in there. Vendor contacts, some. Not just names and numbers, but notes about their kids' graduations, their preferred delivery windows, the specific alloys they specialized in. Pricing structures I'd hammered out over late-night calls and early morning coffees. Delivery schedules optimized down to the hour. It was the invisible architecture holding the whole damn operation together. The reason Meridian Dynamics had gone from $5 million in annual revenue when I started to just north of $12 million last fiscal year. Eleanor appeared in my doorway just as I was taping the second box shut. Her voice was softer now, conspiratorial almost, now that the audience was gone. Colin, this isn't personal, she offered, leaning against the frame. We need someone with a more collaborative approach. I didn't stop packing, didn't even look up. The past 4 quarters speak for themselves, I said, my voice still level. She actually sighed, a little puff of condescending air. Numbers aren't everything in modern business, Colin. And right there I knew. Knew she didn't get it. Knew she couldn't get it. I didn't bother explaining that those numbers came directly from those relationships she dismissed. From the trust I'd painstakingly built with suppliers scattered across half a dozen states. From handshakes that meant more than contracts. From remembering that old Jim Henderson's wife had just beaten cancer, or that young Maria Garcia at Keystone Components was saving up for her son's college tuition. That's what collaboration really looked like, not buzzwords in a meeting. I didn't explain that my supposedly rigid leadership style was the reason we kept getting raw materials, steel from Pennsylvania, circuits from Ohio, polymers from Illinois, right through the supply chain nightmare of 2023, when our competitors were shutting down lines left and right. That my outdated processes, built on knowing exactly who to call when a shipment was delayed by a blizzard in Des Moines, were why we could price our specialized factory automation components 6% lower than anyone else and still maintain margins that made Arthur Sterling grin every damn month. Eleanor wouldn't understand any of that. To her, it was just lines on a spreadsheet, costs to be squeezed. On my way out, I stopped by my team's area. Shook hands with Daniel Mills, my sharp young assistant, with Maria in quality control, with Big Dave on the logistics desk. Wish you all the best, I told them, and I meant it, genuinely. They were good people, dedicated people. They deserved a hell of a lot better than the chaos I knew was coming. Driving home felt strange, surreal. My phone started blowing up almost immediately, texts and missed calls piling up. Shocked colleagues, confused vendors who'd somehow gotten the news already. Whispers travel fast in our industry. I didn't answer any of them. Instead of heading straight home, I found myself turning toward a little park overlooking the city skyline. Found a bench under an old oak tree. It was 1 o'clock on a Monday afternoon. For the first time in 7 years, I had absolutely nowhere I needed to be. Nothing demanding my attention, just emptiness. Congratulations on your freedom, I muttered to the empty air, watching a hawk circling overhead. Freedom, yeah, right. Felt more like being pushed out of a plane without a parachute. But even sitting there numb, a part of my brain was already working. The logistics part, the planning part. I knew what was likely to happen next. I'd seen variations of this story play out before, both in the service and in business. New leadership comes in, all bright ideas and disruptive energy, determined to make their mark by tearing down what they don't understand. The clues were already there. Eleanor Vance's talk about modernizing procurement, the expensive-looking consultant she'd brought in last week, some slick guy talking about implementing a mandatory new vendor portal software. Streamlining communication, he'd called it. What Eleanor, and presumably her consultant, didn't grasp was the bedrock of Meridian's success. Every single major supplier contract wasn't some boilerplate document sitting in a filing cabinet. I'd negotiated each one personally, built on handshakes, mutual respect, and understanding their business almost as well as my own. Not software platforms and automated emails. There was no transition plan for my departure because nobody, least of all Eleanor, had thought to ask for one. She assumed the system ran itself, or worse, that it didn't matter how it ran, as long as the software looked fancy. And now, nobody could ask me. I remembered walking into Meridian Dynamics 7 years earlier. It was a struggling outfit back then, housed in an old, drafty warehouse down by the rail yard. Their products, specialized components for factory automation, were actually brilliant. Innovative designs, solid engineering. But their operations were a disaster. They couldn't deliver consistently, couldn't meet deadlines, couldn't land the big contracts that would let them grow. Arthur Sterling, the founder, was an engineering genius, a true visionary when it came to the tech. But logistics, supply chain management, not his forte. I remember him standing in front of a whiteboard absolutely covered in red ink, delivery delays, cost overruns, angry customer notes. I need someone who can fix this damn mess, Hayes, he'd said, jabbing a finger at the chaos. He had this gruff, no-nonsense way about him. You military guys understand systems. Make this work, and I'll make it worth your while. He wasn't wrong. 15 years as a logistics officer in the Army teaches you a thing or two about building a reliable supply chains under pressure. Not by bullying people into submission. That breeds resentment and breaks down the minute your back is turned. No, you build it on partnerships, mutual dependency, making sure both sides have skin in the game, that both sides benefit from success. So, that first year, I practically lived on the road, put thousands of miles on my old Ford. I visited every single critical supplier personally, sat in their dusty offices, walked their factory floors, drank coffee that tasted like burnt plastic sometimes. I learned their capabilities, their constraints, their bottlenecks. More importantly, I learned about them. Some were small, family-run machine shops in places you wouldn't find on a map. Lima, Ohio, Dubuque, Iowa. Salt-of-the-earth folks who valued a handshake and a straight answer. Others were divisions of larger corporations, where knowing the right purchasing manager, knowing their kid played little league meant you got priority allocation when parts got scarce. It wasn't fast work. It wasn't flashy. But by year 3, Meridian Dynamics had the most robust, most reliable supply network in our sector, probably in the entire Midwest. When the global supply chain choked a couple of years back, when our competitors were furloughing workers because they couldn't get crucial microchips or specialized alloys, we kept running. Our lines stayed hot. Our delivery reliability hit 98.6%. Customer retention climbed over 90%. We were landing those big contracts Arthur dreamed of. Arthur understood. He wasn't a logistics guy, but he saw the results. "Whatever you're doing with these suppliers, Hayes, keep doing it," he'd rumble in our monthly reviews, clapping me on the shoulder. "Best damn investment I ever made was bringing you on board." But then, last spring, Arthur decided to sell. Said he was tired, wanted to spend more time fishing, see his grandkids grow up. Can't blame him. He'd earned it. The investment group that bought Meridian, though, they had a different playbook. Immediately started talking about professionalizing operations, new software systems, new reporting structures nobody needed, new KPIs that measured the wrong things. And finally, they brought in Eleanor Vance. The first real crack appeared during her second week. I had my quarterly supplier visit trip scheduled, a swing through Ohio, Pennsylvania, and back through Indiana. Essential FaceTime, checking in, reinforcing those bonds. Eleanor canceled it via email. An unnecessary expense in the digital age, she called it. Wow, okay. The second crack came a week later. Strategy meeting. I raised concerns about her plan to unilaterally change payment terms with 3 of our key vendors, folks who'd bent over backward for us during the crunch. Tried to explain that pushing them from net 30 to net 60 might save a few pennies on paper, but could damage relationships worth millions. She waved me off. "They'll adjust," she said, all breezy confidence. "We're too important to them now." Oh, the arrogance. The third, and maybe the clearest sign, was overhearing her on the phone in her glass-walled office. Didn't catch who she was talking to, but I heard my department mentioned. "Operations is stuck in the last century," she'd said, voice dripping with disdain. "Needs fresh blood, needs to be dragged into the 21st. Honestly, I could have fought harder then, could have marshaled the data, presented the case studies, tried to make her understand that our success wasn't despite the old school approach, but because of it. Because trust isn't built through a vendor portal. Because loyalty isn't fostered by impersonal emails demanding compliance. But I recognize the pattern, seen it before. New commander comes in, ignores the seasoned NCOs, changes the PT schedule just because they can, and wonders why morale tanks and readiness suffers. It was the same dynamic. Change for the sake of change, driven by ego and a fundamental misunderstanding of what actually worked. So I started preparing, quietly. Started making personal copies of my contact lists, the real ones with the cell numbers and the notes. Started backing up my detailed process notes onto a personal hard drive. Not with any intent to sabotage, not at all. More like documenting the legacy, preparing for the inevitable separation. When the axe finally fell in that Monday meeting, the only real surprise was how public she made it. A power play, a signal to everyone else. Fall in line, or you're next. 3 days after the firing, just 3 days. My personal cell rang. Caller ID showed a name I knew well. Marcus Thorne, chief engineer at Apex Security, one of Meridian's biggest, most demanding customers. A relationship I'd personally nurtured for 5 years. "Colin, Marcus Thorne. Heard what happened," he said, his voice gruff but warm. "They're lost, my friend. Big loss. Appreciate that, Marcus. Listen," he continued, "you free for lunch sometime soon? No agenda, just 2 old guys complaining about the state of the world." We met the next day at a downtown steakhouse, one of those darkwood places where deals get done. Marcus was pushing 60, maybe a bit more, with the kind of weathered hands that told you he'd spent decades actually building things before moving up the ladder. Knew his stuff inside and out. "So," he asked after we'd ordered, leaning back in his chair, "what's next for Colin Hayes?" "Taking some time," I said honestly, "evaluating options, enjoying the sudden lack of conference calls." He nodded slowly, studying my face. "Heard from anyone over at Meridian since, Radio silence, I admitted. "Not surprised," Marcus grunted. This Vance woman, she's already making waves, announced some mandatory new vendor management system yesterday. All suppliers got to sign up, jump through hoops. He paused, held my gaze. You didn't set that up before you left, did you? I shook my head. No, Marcus. All our key vendor relationships were personal. Direct lines, real people solving real problems together. That's how we kept you guys supplied when everyone else was scrambling. That's what I figured, he said, leaning forward slightly. His voice dropped a notch. Look, Colin, I'm going to be straight with you. We're already seeing delays from Meridian. Nothing catastrophic, not yet. But the warning signs are flashing bright red. Your replacement, heard he's some kid fresh out of business school, talks a good game about strategic procurement initiatives, but I swear the guy probably doesn't know the difference between grade 5 and grade 8 fasteners. I took a slow sip of water, trying to keep my expression neutral. It was happening, faster than I'd even expected. Not your problem anymore, I know, Marcus continued, swirling the ice in his glass. But here's something that might be interesting to you. Summit Precision. You know them? Lab equipment, high-spec stuff? I nodded. Good reputation, growing fast. Well, Marcus said, their CEO, Grace Harding, she's an old friend of mine. They're looking for someone to completely overhaul their operations. Serious horsepower needed. Their current setup can't handle the growth they're experiencing. When I heard what happened to you over at Meridian, well, I might have mentioned your name. Appreciate that, Marcus. Really. She wants to meet you, Colin. Said she needs someone who knows how to build robust systems, manage complex supply chains, build relationships that stick. Sound familiar? It did, eerily familiar. Sounded exactly like Meridian Dynamics 7 years ago, standing on the brink, needing someone to fix the damn mess. As we were finishing lunch, just before the check arrived, my phone buzzed on the table. A text message. It was from Arthur Sterling, my old boss. Just heard. What the hell were they thinking? Call me when you get a minute. Driving home from that lunch, something shifted inside me. The numbness was fading. The shock was wearing off. It wasn't anger, not really. I was past that already. It was something colder, sharper, more, calculated. Eleanor Vance had made a critical fundamental error. She'd looked at the $12 million in revenue, looked at the smooth-running operation, and assumed it was the system itself that generated the success, assumed the relationships were incidental, assumed the processes were easily transferable, plug and play. That suppliers would just stick with Meridian out of inertia, or because Meridian was the big customer. She didn't understand. She hadn't bothered to look deep enough. She didn't know that I had deliberately structured every single major supplier agreement to require personal renegotiation. Annually, no automatic renewals, no standard boilerplate terms that could just be handed off to some software program or a junior buyer. Each one was customized. Each one had me listed as the primary point of contact by mutual agreement with the supplier. It wasn't some sneaky sabotage plan I'd cooked up. It was just how I'd always operated, how I believed business should be done. Personal accountability, baked right into the core of the system. My system, built on trust, not transactions. And now that point of contact was gone. That evening, sitting at my kitchen table, I got my first email from Meridian Dynamics since the firing. Not from Eleanor Vance, of course. It was from a mid-level guy in purchasing. Subject line, urgent. The message was short. Need vendor contact information for Heartland Machining. Their primary rep says they only deal directly with Colin Hayes. I stared at the email for a long moment. Then I archived it. Didn't reply. Instead, I picked up my phone. First, I called Arthur Sterling back, had a long talk. Then I called Grace Harding at Summit Precision and scheduled a meeting. Then I made calls to 3 other companies, places that had tried to recruit me away from Meridian over the past few years, just to test the waters, see what was out there. By Friday of that week, I had 4 solid, interesting possibilities shaping up. By the following Monday, after a long weekend of thinking, really thinking, I'd made my decision. I wasn't just going to land on my feet somewhere else. I wasn't just going to rebuild. I was going to take the Summit Precision opportunity, and I was going to show Eleanor Vance and the investors who backed her exactly what kind of value, what kind of stability they had so carelessly, so arrogantly thrown away. 2 weeks to the day after Eleanor Vance dismissed me in front of my peers, I accepted the position of Chief Operations Officer at Summit Precision. They manufactured highly specialized laboratory equipment. Different products than Meridian, sure, but facing very similar supply chain challenges due to their rapid growth and the precision required. Grace Harding, the CEO, was sharp, focused, and refreshingly direct. She didn't waste time with jargon. She wanted results. "We need what you built at Meridian, Colin," she told me during our final interview, looking me straight in the eye. "Our growth is phenomenal, but it's outpacing our infrastructure. We're dropping balls, deliveries are slipping, costs are creeping up. Fix it. You'll have full authority, full backing, and," she added, leaning forward slightly, "there's equity in it for you if you deliver." My first day at Summit, I didn't sit in my new office reading reports. I spent the entire day walking the floor, talking to the line workers, the supervisors, the warehouse guys, asking questions, listening, getting the unfiltered truth about what was working, what wasn't, where the real bottlenecks were. Standard operating procedure for me. You learn more in an hour on the floor than you do in a week of meetings. By day 3, I had a pretty clear picture. The weaknesses were obvious: classic growing pains, unreliable component deliveries from certain key suppliers, quality inconsistencies causing rework downstream, and frankly, some pretty wasteful inventory practices. Bleeding cash, nothing insurmountable, just needed structure, process, and those crucial relationships. That Friday afternoon, my personal cell phone rang. Display showed a name I hadn't expected to see again: Eleanor Vance. I stared at it for a second, then let it go to voicemail. Her message, when I listened later, was clipped. Polite on the surface, but underscored with a definite tension. "Colin, hope you're doing well. Listen, we seem to be encountering some challenges with a few supplier transitions here at Meridian. Just wondering if you might possibly be available for perhaps a brief consultation? Compensated generously, of course." A brief consultation. Right, I deleted the voicemail, didn't call back. Monday morning, my new administrative assistant at Summit forwarded me an email that had come through the general company contact form online. Sender: Eleanor Vance, President, Meridian Dynamics. Subject: urgent request for Colin Hayes. I deleted it without opening it. By Wednesday of that week, she was calling my personal cell phone again. Multiple times: morning, lunch, afternoon. I finally just blocked her number. Enough was enough. Then came Thursday. Mid-afternoon, my assistant buzzed me. "Mr. Hayes, there's an Eleanor Vance here from Meridian Dynamics. Says she needs to see you urgently." I pulled up the security feed for the reception area on my monitor. There she was, standing by the front desk, clutching her designer handbag, looking decidedly less composed than usual. Her power suit looked a little rumpled. "Tell Ms. Vance I'm in meetings all day and unavailable," I instructed my assistant calmly. These were my standing instructions for any unexpected visitors from Meridian. I watched the feed as the receptionist relayed the message. Saw Eleanor lean in, her voice tight even through the silent video. "Tell him it's urgent." I could almost hear her saying it. "We have a major production delay. It's about to cost us millions." The receptionist held firm. Eleanor waited, paced a little, checked her phone, waited some more. For 30 minutes, she stood there, her frustration visibly mounting. The perfect, cool composure I remembered was cracking under the strain. Finally, she turned abruptly and walked out. That same afternoon, I got a detailed email from Daniel Mills, my former assistant at Meridian. We'd stayed in touch quietly. He was a good kid, smart, loyal, and he knew I cared about the people still there. He'd become my unofficial eyes and ears inside the storm. "Complete chaos here, Colin," he wrote. "Heartland Machining just raised their prices 15% on the new contract negotiation. Said it reflects current market realities. Keystone Components suddenly pushed all their delivery dates out 6 weeks, citing internal capacity adjustments. 3 other critical vendors have developed capacity issues. that somehow only seemed to affect Meridian orders. Funny how that works. Eleanor's called 4 emergency management meetings this week alone. Panic is setting in. I read the email twice, felt a grim sort of satisfaction. Maybe, but mostly just inevitability. I hadn't asked these vendors to punish Meridian, hadn't called a single one since I left. I didn't need to. They were smart people. They ran businesses. They'd seen how Meridian's new leadership treated someone who'd been a reliable partner for years. They'd drawn their own conclusions about who they could trust, who valued the relationship beyond the next invoice. Some of these folks, I'd worked with them, not just at Meridian, but at my previous company too. They knew my track record. They knew I kept my word. And they clearly suspected Eleanor Vance wouldn't. Simple as that. Business karma, maybe. The next morning, Arthur Sterling called me. "Board's starting to ask some hard questions, Colin," he said, his voice weary. Arthur had kept a 15% stake in Meridian after the sale, stayed on the board as a sort of founder emeritus. Eleanor's blaming everything on vendor hostility, spinning this yarn about how you poisoned the well on your way out, actively sabotaging things. "Arthur, you know me better than that," I replied truthfully. "I've had zero contact with any Meridian vendor since the day I walked out that door. I believe you, son, 100%, but she's managed to convince herself she's the victim in all this. The investors are getting nervous." He paused, and I could hear him sigh. "They lost the Stellar Dynamics contract yesterday, Colin. Big one. Couldn't guarantee delivery dates." Stellar Dynamics, one of Meridian's largest accounts, a complex, high-value client I'd personally spent nearly 3 years cultivating before they finally signed on. Landing them had been a major win. Hearing they'd walked, that stung, even now. But it wasn't my problem anymore. "Not my concern now, Arthur," I said, keeping my voice even. "Course not," he agreed readily. "Water under the bridge. By the way, how's the new gig over at Summit?" "Good," I said. "Different challenges, similar solutions. Making progress." I hesitated for just a beat. "Actually, Arthur, I might be needing to bring on some additional manufacturing capacity sooner rather than later. Things are ramping up faster than expected here." A thought had been forming, a possibility clicking into place. "You wouldn't happen to know anyone looking to sublease some well-equipped factory space, would you?" There was a moment of silence on the line, then Arthur chuckled, a low rumble. "Funny you should ask, Colin, real funny. Based on the way things are going, I might just have some leverage to help with that very situation. Very soon." A week later, things escalated. A formal, stiff letter arrived at Summit Precision via courier. From Meridian Dynamics legal department. Fancy letterhead, lots of intimidating legal jargon. The gist of it was an accusation, claiming I had violated supposed non-solicitation clauses in my original employment agreement by improperly interfering with their crucial vendor relationships. Sabotage, essentially. I read it, felt a flicker of annoyance, then just forwarded it without comment to Grace Harding's legal team at Summit. Their response came back within a couple of hours, succinct and dismissive. No merit, no evidence, no basis for concern, standard intimidation tactic. They were right, of course. I hadn't solicited anyone. I hadn't interfered. I had simply stepped aside, removed the linchpin I represented, and let reality and the consequences of Eleanor Vance's own decisions take their inevitable course. That night, for the first time in months, I slept deeply, soundly. The kind of rest that comes when a weight you didn't fully realize you were carrying finally lifts. About a month into my new role at Summit Precision, really hitting my stride, I got a brief message on LinkedIn. It was from Sarah Jenkins, Meridian's head of finance. Sarah and I had always worked well together back at Meridian. Both of us were detail-oriented, process-driven types. We appreciated competence, disliked office politics, and preferred results over rhetoric. "Can we meet? Coffee?" was all her message said. We picked a neutral coffee shop, halfway between Summit's offices and Meridian's headquarters. Sarah looked exhausted. Not just tired, but that bone-deep fatigue you see in people fighting losing battles day after day. Dark circles under her eyes, her usual sharp energy dimmed. "They're blaming you for everything, Colin. she said almost before the waitress had even put our coffees down. The vendor problems, the production delays, the lost contracts, especially Stellar Dynamics. Eleanor has constructed this whole narrative that you deliberately sabotage the company on your way out. I stirred my coffee slowly. That would have required quite a bit of planning, Sarah, I said quietly, especially given the roughly 10 minutes notice I received regarding my termination. I know, she sighed, rubbing her temples. Believe me, I know. But here's the part you probably don't know. She lowered her voice, leaning in across the small table. Eleanor Vance, she wasn't just brought in for vision. She was brought in with a very specific mandate: cut costs drastically, pump up the short-term margins, and prep Meridian for a quick flip. The investment group, they want out. They want to sell again within 18 months max. But Meridian was profitable, I pointed out. Solid margins, steady growth. Not profitable enough for them, Sarah countered. They have these insane targets, need to show consistent 20% margins quarter over quarter to attract the kind of buyer they want. She pulled out her tablet, tapped the screen a few times, and turned it to face me. A spreadsheet glowed with projections. Look at these numbers, Colin. Look at the supply chain cost reduction targets they handed down after you left. I studied the figures, my gut clenched. The targets were ludicrous, impossible. The only way to even approach those kinds of cuts would be to completely gut product quality, switch to cheap, unreliable overseas suppliers, destroying the company's reputation for reliability in the process. Or both. It would kill the company long term, but maybe, just maybe, juice the numbers for a few quarters before the collapse, long enough to sell it off to some unsuspecting buyer. There's more, Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper now. Eleanor didn't fire you because of your leadership style, Colin. That was just the public excuse. She fired you because you were the only one in senior management with the knowledge, the standing, and frankly, the guts to challenge those targets, to tell the investors they were dreaming. The rest of us? We were kept completely in the dark about the real plan until after you were gone. And then it clicked. The public firing, in front of everyone. That's why she did it in the big meeting, I realized aloud. It wasn't just about getting rid of me. It was a warning to everyone else left. Sarah nodded grimly. Exactly, and trust me, it worked. Nobody's pushing back on anything now. People are scared for their jobs. So, why tell me all this now, Sarah? She closed her tablet, met my eyes directly. Because I handed in my resignation yesterday, Colin. I'm done. I'm not going to be part of what comes next. She hesitated, took a deep breath, and because there's a board meeting scheduled for next week. Arthur's going to be there, but he's outnumbered. They're going to discuss emergency restructuring measures, including, her voice dropped again, potentially closing the main St. Paul facility entirely and moving all production to Mexico to hit those margin targets. My stomach dropped. The St. Paul facility, that was the heart of Meridian. 200 good people, skilled workers, many of whom I'd hired myself. Arthur won't let that happen, I said, maybe trying to convince myself. He built that place. Arthur's being pressured, Colin, hard. They're trying to force him to sell his remaining shares, at a significant discount, I might add, making it very, very difficult for him to say no or block their moves. I walked Sarah Jenkins to her car in the parking lot, thanked her sincerely for the information, for her courage. Then I got in my own car and drove straight to Arthur Sterling's house out in the suburbs. No call ahead, just went. I found him where I often found him on a weekday afternoon, in his garage, tinkering with one of his beloved old motorcycles. Engine parts laid out neatly on a workbench, smell of oil and gasoline in the air. They're going to gut the company, Arthur, I said without preamble, leaning against the door jamb. I quickly relayed everything Sarah Jenkins had told me, the cost-cutting mandate, the planned sale, the threat to the St. Paul plant, the pressure on him. Arthur slowly put down the wrench he was holding, wiped his greasy hands on an old red rag. His shoulders slumped a little. Yeah, he said heavily. I've been feeling the squeeze. Bastards want my shares at 10 cents on the ball and below fair value. threatening legal action if I don't play ball. Don't sell, Arthur. Not yet. He gave me a weary look. Easy for you to say, Colin. You're not the one getting threatening calls from their high-priced lawyers every damn day. I pushed off the door jamb, walked over to his workbench, picked up a gleaming chrome spark plug, turned it over in my hand. What if there was another option, Arthur? I asked quietly. What if Summit Precision acquired Meridian Dynamics instead? Arthur stopped wiping his hands, just stared at me, blinked. You're serious? Grace Harding is looking to expand aggressively, I explained. She needs manufacturing capacity, skilled labor, and established product lines that complement ours. Summit needs what Meridian has. And Meridian desperately needs leadership that actually values what it's built, leadership that understands the business isn't just numbers on a page. It makes sense, Arthur. Real sense. He thought for a moment, stroking his chin. Eleanor's investors, they wouldn't sell to you, Colin, not directly. Too much ego involved now. They'd rather burn it to the ground. Maybe not directly, I conceded, but they would sell if Meridian was demonstrably on the verge of collapse. If their only hope of recovering even a fraction of their investment was a fire sale to anyone willing to take it off their hands quickly. I met his eyes across the cluttered workbench. How long, Arthur? How long and until the cash flow problems become truly critical? Until the banks start calling their loans? Arthur leaned back against the motorcycle, his eyes narrowed in thought. Calculating. At the current burn rate, with the contracts they've lost, the production slowdowns, 6 weeks, maybe 8, tops. And that's if nothing else goes wrong. He looked up, a slow, assessing gaze locking onto mine. And then, a slow smile started to spread across his weathered face. A glint appeared in his eyes. Colin Hayes, he said, shaking his head slowly. You calculating son of a gun. I'm not suggesting anything unethical, Arthur, I clarify. Quickly, holding up a hand, I'm merely speculating on current market conditions and likely future trajectories. Arthur nodded, the smile widening. Of course, Colin, purely hypothetical business analysis, understood. That night, back at my desk, long after everyone else at Summit had gone home, I drafted a detailed memo to Grace Harding. I outlined the potential acquisition opportunity, the strategic fit, the manufacturing capacity solution, the access to complementary product lines and customer relationships that Meridian, even in its weakened state, still possessed. I attached Sarah Jenkins' anonymized projections, highlighting the investor's desperation and the ticking clock. I wasn't orchestrating Meridian's downfall. Let me be clear about that. Eleanor Vance and her backers were doing a fine job of that all by themselves, driven by greed and incompetence. I was simply positioning Summit Precision, my new company, to be there, to pick up the pieces, to salvage what could be salvaged, and maybe, just maybe, save those 200 jobs in St. Paul in the process. For the next month, my focus was laser sharp on strengthening Summit Precision's own operations. We implemented rigorous new inventory controls, shaving waste, streamlined production flows on the factory floor, boosting efficiency, established crystal clear quality standards and feedback loops. Most importantly, I started rebuilding their supplier relationships using the exact same playbook that had worked so well at Meridian. Personal connections, site visits, finding mutual benefit, thinking long-term, building trust, one handshake at a time. Meanwhile, across town, Meridian Dynamics continued its downward spiral, exactly as predicted. Not because I lifted a finger to interfere. I didn't have to. It was the natural, unavoidable consequence of Eleanor Vance's approach, treating suppliers like adversaries, squeezing them relentlessly, managing by dictate instead of dialogue. It just doesn't work, not in the long run. 3 more clients suspended orders this week. Daniel Mills texted me one evening. Production's running at maybe 40% capacity now. They started the first round of layoffs today. Mostly admin staff for now, but floor workers are next, everyone knows it. I forwarded the update to Grace Harding, adding it to the growing acquisition dossier I was meticulously building. She'd been cautious at first, understandably. Acquiring a distressed competitor is always risky, but as the potential financial advantages became clearer, as the strategic fit solidified, she was coming around. "If we're going to make a move, Colin, it needs to be soon," she responded to my latest update, "before they lose too much value, before the assets are completely stripped." The following Friday, I got an unexpected visitor at Summit's front desk. It was Marcus Thorne, the chief engineer from Apex Security, the customer who'd first tipped me off to the Summit opportunity. He showed up unannounced, just like before. "Got time for a quick lunch?" he asked, that familiar gruff warmth in his voice. Over pastrami sandwiches at a nearby deli, Marcus got straight to the point. "We're pulling all our remaining business from Meridian, Colin," he stated flatly, "effective immediately. We just can't rely on them anymore. Too many delays, too many quality issues creeping in. It's hurting our commitments to our customers." "Sorry to hear that, Marcus," I said, and I genuinely meant it. Despite everything Eleanor Vance had done, I took no pleasure in seeing the company itself crumble, knowing good people were caught in the middle. "Yeah, well, it is what it is," Marcus shrugged. "But it creates a need. We need a new primary supplier for those specialized automation components. A reliable one, someone who can deliver quality on time without drama." He paused, took a bite of his sandwich, and looked at me pointedly. "Someone like Summit Precision." I put my own sandwich down carefully. "Marcus, you know we don't currently manufacture those specific types of components here at Summit. It's a different product line." "But you could," Marcus countered, a knowing smile playing on his lips. "With the right equipment, the right expertise, right?" "Hypothetically, yes," I conceded. "It would require significant investment, setting up a dedicated production line." "What if I told you," Marcus leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping again, "that Apex Security is prepared to sign a 3-year guaranteed contract with significant minimum volume guarantees? Enough volume," he emphasized, "to more than justify the investment in setting up that new production line." Wow, this wasn't just a potential new piece of business for Summit. This was leverage, rocket fuel for the acquisition plan. Having Apex Security, a major industry player, locked in as a guaranteed anchor customer for those specific components would make Meridian's existing assets, their equipment, their skilled workforce, even their tarnished brand name, exponentially more valuable to us. It dramatically de-risked the acquisition. "I'd need to discuss this internally with Grace, of course," I said, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. "But Marcus, that's certainly very interesting." When I brought Marcus Thorne's proposal to Grace Harding that same afternoon, laying it alongside the latest grim updates on Meridian's rapidly deteriorating financial situation and the looming threat of the St. Paul closure, she didn't hesitate. Her eyes lit up with strategic clarity. "Make them an offer, Colin," she said decisively. "A lowball offer maybe, but fair enough that they'd be fools to refuse it in their position. But," she added, tapping a finger on her desk, "do it through Arthur Sterling first. Let him approach the investment group. Test the waters, gauge their desperation level before we show our full hand as Summit Precision." I called Arthur that evening, laid out the plan. He would approach Eleanor Vance's investors not as an adversary, but as a concerned former owner, deeply worried about the company's survival. He'd tell them he'd quietly sounded out some contacts and found a potential lifeline, a private, unnamed investment group interested in acquiring Meridian quickly, taking the problem off their hands at a reduced but still face-saving price. "Won't mention Summit, won't mention you initially," Arthur confirmed, his voice filled with a newfound energy. "Just see how hard they bite." "Perfect, Arthur. Let me know as soon as you hear anything." 3 days later, Arthur called back. I could hear the grin in his voice. "They bit, Colin, bit harder and faster than I even expected. Barely negotiated on the initial price framework I floated. They just want out, before the next disastrous quarterly financials hit the street." "Did they ask who the buyer was?" "Of course they did," Arthur chuckled. "I told them it was a small, discreet private investment group specializing in operational turnarounds. Kept it vague. They didn't push too hard. Honestly, Colin, I think they're too panicked, too eager to stop the bleeding, to care much about the details right now." Things moved incredibly fast after that. Grace Harding assembled Summit's acquisition team, legal, finance, HR. I provided the deep operational intelligence, detailed assessments of Meridian's remaining assets, their equipment condition, their workforce skills, their salvageable customer relationships, the state of their supplier network, or what was left of it. We structured the deal carefully, making the retention of as many Meridian employees as possible a key condition. These were people I knew, people whose skills and dedication deserved far better than the chaos Eleanor Vance had inflicted, people who could help us integrate quickly and effectively. 2 intense weeks later, with the preliminary acquisition agreement hammered out and ready for signature, it was finally time. Time to reveal Summit Precision as the buyer. Time for me, Colin Hayes, to step back into the building I'd been so unceremoniously ejected from just 3 months prior. This time, as the architect of its rescue. The final signing meeting was scheduled for Monday morning, 9 o'clock sharp, at Meridian Dynamics' headquarters, in the main conference room, the very same room where Eleanor Vance had publicly fired me. I selected my suit carefully that morning, not one of my usual work suits, something a bit sharper. Not to impress Eleanor, God no, but out of a certain respect for the moment, for the gravity of it. This wasn't about revenge, I told myself, adjusting my tie in the mirror. It wasn't about gloating. It was about restoration, about setting things right. I walked into that conference room at precisely 9 a.m. Grace Harding was beside me, projecting calm authority. Our lead attorney followed close behind. The investors were already there, seated around the long table, looking grim but relieved. Arthur Sterling sat near them, a neutral expression on his face. And at the head of the table sat Eleanor Vance. The look on her face when she saw me walk in, honestly, it was worth every single sleepless night, every moment of uncertainty over the past 3 months. Pure, unadulterated shock, followed by a dawning horror, then flushing anger. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice sharp, brittle. Her eyes darted from me to Grace to Arthur, then to the lead investor, a thin, precise-looking man named Richard Carlisle. "What is he doing here?" Arthur Sterling spoke calmly, evenly. "Mr. Hayes is here representing the acquiring company, Eleanor." Eleanor shot to her feet, hands planted flat on the table. "This is a joke. It has to be a joke. We are not selling this company to him." Richard Carlisle cleared his throat, a dry, papery sound. "The preliminary agreement has been signed, Miss Vance," he stated coolly, looking directly at her. "Summit Precision is acquiring the operating assets of Meridian Dynamics. Mr. Hayes, as their Chief Operations Officer, will be overseeing the integration process." "You can't do this," Eleanor insisted, her voice rising. She whirled back to face me. "He's the reason we're in this mess. He deliberately sabotaged our vendor relationships. He poisoned the well." I remained standing, hands clasped calmly behind my back. I met her furious gaze without flinching. "Ms. Vance," I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the tense room, "I have not contacted a single Meridian vendor, supplier, or customer since my departure 3 months ago. Not one email, not one phone call. I would be perfectly happy to provide detailed phone records, email logs, and even sworn statements to confirm that fact, should it be necessary." "Then how do you explain," she started, gesturing wildly. "What you have been experiencing, Miss Vance," I interrupted, still calm, letting the words sink in, "is simply the natural, predictable consequence of treating vital business relationships as mere transactions. It's the result of prioritizing short-term cost-cutting over long-term stability. Those vendors," I gestured vaguely towards the window, towards the outside world, "didn't need me to tell them how little you valued their partnership, how little you understood their business. They figured it out all by themselves based on your actions." Grace Harding stepped forward then, smoothly taking control of the meeting. "Gentlemen, Ms. Vance," she addressed the table, her tone brisk and professional, "we're here today to finalize the acquisition terms and sign the closing documents. Summit Precision will retain majority ownership. Arthur Sterling will maintain his current equity stake. As agreed, we intend to keep the Meridian Dynamics brand for certain product lines and, most importantly, retain as many current Meridian employees as the integrated operations can sustainably support." Eleanor looked desperately towards Richard Carlyle and the other investors, searching for support, for any sign they would back her. Fight this. But their faces were blank, closed off. They were cutting their losses. She was just another line item, another liability to be shed as part of the deal. The fight went out of her then. Her shoulders slumped. What? What about me? She finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. Grace glanced briefly at me, a silent acknowledgement, then looked back at Eleanor. Her expression was neutral, businesslike. Your services, Ms. Vance, will not be needed during the transition period, or beyond. Eleanor Vance slowly gathered her papers, her hands trembling almost imperceptibly. As she stood to leave, she fixed me with one last venomous glare. You planned this, she accused, her voice thick with resentment. From the very beginning, you set me up to fail. I simply shook my head, slowly. No anger, no triumph, just a quiet certainty. No, Eleanor, I said softly. You did that all by yourself. The moment you decided that relationships didn't matter. The moment you dismissed 7 years of careful work without even trying to understand it. She didn't say another word, just turned and walked out of the conference room, out of the company, out of my life. The investors stayed, suddenly eager to sign the papers, close the deal, and salvage what they could from the wreckage they'd helped create. As the pen scratched across the signature lines, I didn't feel a surge of victory, just quiet, a quiet sense that maybe, just maybe, a certain kind of justice had finally been served. Not loud or vengeful, but steady and inevitable, like a river finding its course. 6 months later, I stood on the newly reorganized manufacturing floor. It hummed with activity. The integration of Summit Precision in the salvaged parts of Meridian Dynamics was well underway. We'd managed to keep 185 of the original 200 Meridian jobs in St. Paul, consolidating administrative functions and leveraging the best of both companies' production capabilities. More importantly, we were painstakingly rebuilding those crucial supplier relationships, the ones that had been the bedrock of Meridian's original success. It took time, lots of visits, lots of conversations, explaining our new vision, honoring past commitments where we could, demonstrating through action, not just words, that we valued partnership, reliability, mutual respect. The old way, my way. The combined company, operating under the Summit Precision banner, but retaining the Meridian name for its legacy products, was already showing strong results. We were on track to hit $20 million in annual revenue by year-end, nearly double what Meridian had achieved even at its peak under my previous tenure. Grace Harding had made good on her promise too. The equity stake was real, vesting progressively. I had skin in the game again, real skin. As I finished my daily walkthrough, Daniel Milne, my former assistant at Meridian, now our thriving production manager, approached me, tablet in hand. Good news, Colin, he grinned. Heartland Machining just confirmed the revised delivery schedule for the next quarter, ahead of time, and Keystone Components formally agreed to the new Joint Quality Improvement Program. Their VP said, and I quote, "We really appreciate the return to the old way of doing business, Dan. Feels right again." Good, I nodded, feeling a genuine warmth spread through me. Excellent. Let's schedule visits to both of them next month. Fly out, walk their floors, see the improvements firsthand. Show them we're serious. Will do, Daniel said, making a note. He paused. By the way, heard anything about Eleanor Vance? I shrugged. Last I heard, she landed some consulting gig with a private equity firm down in Chicago. Same kind of operation that bought Meridian. Daniel shook his head slightly. Think she learned anything from any of this? I considered the question as we walked past a line where workers were assembling sophisticated laboratory centrifuges right alongside components destined for factory robotics, the integrated product lines that were already giving us a powerful competitive edge. Learned anything? Probably not the right lesson, I answered finally. People rarely do, Daniel. They tend to learn the lesson that best fits the narrative they want to believe. That evening, I stayed late, reviewing blueprints for our next planned expansion, fueled in part by that big Apex security contract. The facility felt quiet, settled. Arthur Sterling stopped by my office doorway on his way out, fishing gear slung over his shoulder, heading up north for the weekend. "You proved your point, Colin," he said, leaning against the frame, a satisfied look on his face. "Built it back even better than before." I looked up from the plans, smiled faintly. "Wasn't about proving a point, Arthur." He just grinned. "Sure, Colin. Whatever helps you sleep at night, son." He gave a wave and was gone. I returned to my paperwork, but my mind drifted back to that afternoon in the park, right after the firing. Sitting on that bench, watching the hawk circle, feeling adrift, that feeling of quiet absurdity. Sometimes, just going with the flow, accepting what comes, isn't the answer. Sometimes the current is pulling you towards the rocks. Sometimes you have to push back. Not with noise, not with anger or open vengeance. That just burns you out, poisons you from the inside. But with quiet determination, with competence, with a focus on building something solid, something valuable, something that lasts. I hadn't set out to destroy Eleanor Vance or to take over Meridian Dynamics. Honestly, I hadn't. I'd simply refused to stand by and watch years of good work in the livelihoods of good people be casually dismantled by someone who couldn't be bothered to see its true value. I focused on building something new, something better, using the same principles of trust and partnership. And when the opportunity arose to salvage the old, to restore what had been broken, well, I took it. Maybe that was revenge enough. The quiet, enduring revenge of simply doing things the right way and sleeping well at night because of it. Stories like this, they stick with you. Maybe you've seen something similar in your own life. Maybe you've felt that sting of injustice or watched competence get pushed aside by politics. What do you think? Was it justice? Was it just business? I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. If these kinds of stories resonate with you, stories about resilience and quiet strength, finding a way, consider subscribing to the channel. We share powerful true stories here every week. And if you feel moved to support what we do, you can use the super thanks button right below the video. Giving in its own way is often part of the healing process too. Thanks for listening, really.